The August heat in Rock Creek was not merely uncomfortable. It was predatory, a living thing that wrapped itself around a body and squeezed until breathing became a conscious act of defiance. The air shimmered above the rutted main street, in brass-colored waves distorting the false-fronted buildings until they seemed to waver like mirages about to dissolve into nothingness. Dust hung suspended in the stillness, fine as flour coating every surface with a pale gray film that tasted of alkali and disappointment when it settled on the tongue. Genevieve Laurent had learned to hate this heat during her first summer in the territory, but she had also learned that hatred changed nothing. The sun would rise each morning like a hammer striking an anvil, and it would beat down without mercy until evening finally brought a few hours of merely oppressive warmth instead of the furnace blast of midday. There was no appealing to it, no negotiating with it, no escape from it except to endure. She worked in her struggling garden now, 3 miles west of town, where her small holding clung to the banks of Tallow Creek with the desperate tenacity of a woman clinging to the last handhold before a fatal fall. The hoe in her blistered hands was an old one, its wooden handle worn smooth by her dead husband's grip. And now by hers, the iron blade dulled from striking more rocks than soil in the 18 months since Pierre's death. The bean plants she was trying to coax from the stubborn earth looked as exhausted as she felt pale, stunted things that seemed to be contemplating surrender. Leonie dozed in her wooden crate in the narrow strip of shade beside the cabin, mercifully quiet for once, her small chest rising and falling in the deep sleep of infancy. 9 months old now, old enough to smile and reach for things, old enough to recognize her mother's face and voice, but far too young to understand. Why they lived alone out here, why there was never quite enough food, why her mother's eyes sometimes went distant and hollow when she looked at the half-finished cabin that would never be completed now. Pierre had been a dreamer, a stonemason from Lyon, who had believed the stories about opportunities in the American West. He had been gentle and earnest, and completely unprepared for a place like Rock Creek, where dreams went to die of exposure or exhaustion or simple economics. The roof collapse that killed him had been ruled an accident, improper construction during a heavy snow materials purchased on credit from men who did not care whether their lumber was sound, as long as the promissory notes were signed. Those notes sat in a drawer inside the cabin, now a stack of legal paper covered in dense text that Genevieve had tried repeatedly to parse. Her English was adequate for daily transactions, but the language of contracts and obligations might as well have been ancient Greek. She had meant to ask someone trustworthy to explain them, but trustworthy people were in short supply, and asking questions often led to more problems than it solved. She heard the horses before she saw them, a steady 4-beat rhythm that grew louder, then stopped just beyond her fence line. Her hands tightened on the hoe handle as she straightened slowly, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of one dirt-caked hand. 4 men sat astride their horses in the shimmering heat. The man in front was Lightning Bill Haskell, and Genevieve felt her stomach drop, even before he removed his expensive hat in a mockery of courtesy. Bill was perhaps 40 with pale blue eyes that reminded Genevieve of winter ice on the Seine, beautiful and absolutely pitiless. His suit was tailored black wool despite the heat, his boots polished to a mirror, shined his silver-banded hat, worth more than everything Genevieve owned combined. He smiled as he dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. Behind him came Sheriff Clayton Webb, looking uncomfortable and considerably older than his years, the tin star on his vest tarnished and catching the light weakly. 2 ranch hands flanked them both, wearing gun belts slung low on their hips, their faces sun-darkened and expressionless. "Mrs. Laurent." Bill called out, his voice carrying easily across the dusty yard. "I do hope we're not disturbing you on this fine afternoon." The words were polite, but the tone underneath was something else, entirely the sound of a cat addressing a cornered mouse. Genevieve set down her hoe carefully and walked toward the fence, forcing her spine straight, despite the fear coiling in her belly. What do you want, Mr. Haskell? Her accent thickened when she was nervous, turning the W into a V, but she kept her voice level. Bill reached into his coat with deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment, and produced a folded document. He unfolded it with the care of a man, revealing a royal flush smoothing the creases against his thigh, before extending it toward her. I'm afraid we have some unpleasant business to discuss, Mrs. Laurent. Your late husband, and may I say again, he was a fine man, a true craftsman, entered into certain financial arrangements with various parties in Rock Creek. Some of those arrangements, through the normal course of business transfers, have come into my possession. Genevieve did not take the paper. Pierre paid his debts. He was an honest man. Oh, I've no doubt of his honesty, ma'am. None whatsoever. But honesty and solvency are sadly two different matters entirely. Bill's smile never wavered. Sheriff Webb, would you be so kind as to read the relevant portion to Mrs. Laurent? I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstanding due to language difficulties. The sheriff dismounted heavily, took the paper from Bill, and cleared his throat. He would not meet Genevieve's eyes as he began to read in a flat, reluctant monotone. Be it known that Pierre Laurent Stonemason of Rock Creek Territory does hereby acknowledge receipt of funds in the amount of $375 for the purchase of materials and labor for the construction of a residential dwelling on property claim. Number 247, said property being bounded by Tallow Creek to the north and... He stumbled over the legal descriptions, his voice growing quieter. In the event that full repayment is not rendered within 6 calendar months of the borrower's demise, all assets including but not limited to livestock structures, real property and dependents shall be considered forfeit as collateral against said debt. The word dependents hit Genevieve like a physical blow. That is not possible. Pierre would never sign such a clause. Bill's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had gone flat. And yet, there's his signature clear as day, right there at the bottom, witnessed by 2 upstanding members of the community. Genevieve snatched the document and stared at it. The first portion was indeed in Pierre's neat script, but the clause about collateral was in a different hand, entirely heavier pressure, cruder letters, fresher ink. This was added later. She said, her voice rising. Someone has written this after Pierre signed. This is fraud. Fraud is a serious accusation, Mrs. Laurent. Bill's tone remained pleasant, but something dangerous flickered in those ice-chip eyes. One that would require proof. Considerable proof. The kind that takes time and money to gather. The ink is different. What I see, Bill interrupted smoothly, is a legal document properly witnessed bearing your husband's authenticated signature. What a territorial judge would see is the same. In truth, even then no statute explicitly allowed children to be listed as collateral. But in a town where judges drank Bill's whiskey, such niceties of the law seldom mattered. He let that sink in, watching her with the patience of a man who knew he held all the cards. Then his voice softened, became almost paternal. But I'm not an unreasonable man, Mrs. Laurent. So let me offer you a solution. Sign over the property deed to me and agree to marry me within 30 days. In exchange, the debt is satisfied. You and the child have a comfortable home. The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, Genevieve felt something cold unfurl in her stomach. You want me to marry you? It's an eminently practical arrangement. And if I refuse? The smile vanished entirely. Then the law takes its course. The property is forfeit. The livestock is forfeit. And the child, as a dependent listed in the collateral clause, is forfeit. I'll place her with a suitable family. If you can raise the funds to repay the debt, you can reclaim her. If not, he spread his hands. There are families back east who are always looking to adopt. I'm told the orphan trains run regularly now. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You cannot take my child. That is not legal. It's entirely legal, I'm afraid. Sheriff Webb. The sheriff finally looked at her, and what Genevieve saw in his weathered face was worse than cruelty. It was resignation. The law's on his side, ma'am. Unless you can prove forgery, which means witnesses and depositions and lawyers, the paper stands. You have 3 days to decide, Mrs. Laurent, Bill said. 3 days to either sign the deed and agree to the marriage or to raise $422.16. After that, I'll be forced to collect my collateral. He remounted his horse with fluid grace. I'll be back on Friday at noon. I do hope you'll make the sensible choice. And if I do not, Bill looked down at her, and for just a moment the mask slipped entirely. What she saw underneath was not anger or cruelty, but simple, cold indifference. Then the child disappears. I know people who handle difficult situations. A 9-month-old without proper documentation can vanish very easily in this territory. Do we understand each other? Genevieve could not speak, could only stare as Bill touched his hat brim and rode away, leaving her alone in the yard with the sun beating down and the world crumbling around her. She sank to her knees in the dust, the paper clutched in her hand, and wept. She did not notice the figure watching from the cottonwood grove a quarter-mile distant. Kangji sat his paint horse in perfect stillness, his dark eyes taking in the scene. He had learned to make himself invisible to white eyes, but he had also learned to read trouble. And he recognized it now. The next 3 days passed in a nightmare haze. Genevieve barely slept, pacing the cabin while Leonie cried. She rode into town, tried the bank, the merchants, even the minister. Everyone had the same response: sympathy and a shake of the head. No one wanted to cross Lightning Bill Haskell. On the third night, as false dawn grayed the sky, Genevieve heard hoofbeats. Her heart hammered as she grabbed Leonie and pressed against the wall. I know you are awake. The voice was calm, accented. I mean no harm. I am Kangji from the Lakota camp. I have something to tell you. Genevieve crept to the window. A man stood beside a paint horse, hands visible and empty. He wore buckskin and his long black hair hung in 2 braids. What do you want? I saw what happened 3 days ago. I know Lightning Bill, and I know what he is. He paused. There is a doctor in town, Dr. Martin Archer. He is not owned by Bill. If you need help, he is the one to ask. But you must go now before Bill comes. Why are you telling me this? The figure was silent for a long moment. Because 2 winters ago, white men took my sister's son when he was sick. They said the child was collateral. By the time we found a doctor willing to help, the boy was dead. Another pause. I do not forget. Before Genevieve could respond, he mounted and rode away into the dawn. She did not hesitate. She bundled Leonie and started walking toward Rock Creek. 7 miles. She could make it. She did not see the rider who spotted her leaving, racing ahead to Bill with the news. By the time Genevieve reached town, the sun was climbing toward noon. She found Dr. Archer's office above the apothecary and climbed the stairs. The door opened. Mrs. Laurent, the gray-haired doctor said. Come in quickly. He examined Pierre's signature under a magnifying glass. The collateral clause was added later. Different hand, different ink, clear forgery. Can we prove it? Proving it to me is easy. Proving it to a judge who drinks Bill's whiskey, that's harder. Suddenly shouting erupted from below. The doctor's face went white. They're here. Genevieve ran to the window. Bill stood in the street with armed men. And there near the saloon steps sat Leonie in a wooden carriage. Her blood turned to ice. How? He must have sent men to your cabin the moment you left. Dr. Archer shoved papers at her. There's a school teacher, Clarissa Finch. She's been tracking Bill's finances. And a mine supervisor, Arthur Rowland. If we can combine evidence, splintering wood cut him off as men kicked in the door below. What happened next seared itself into Genevieve's memory like a brand Dr. Archer shoving her toward a back staircase. Running through an alley. Bill's voice, Mrs. Laurent, come out peacefully. Breaking onto the street because Léonie was crying. Bill standing beside the carriage, their eyes meeting. Bill smiling as he released the brake. If you want her, come and get her. The carriage rolled forward. Genevieve ran. Bill's men grabbed her, wrestled her down. She fought, broke free, threw herself forward. Hit the ground on her stomach, began to crawl. The packed earth tore at her knees. Dust filled her mouth. Blood from her palms left dark smears. The carriage rolled faster, bouncing over stones, and Léonie's cries grew frantic. 5 feet away. 6, 7. Genevieve's fingernails carved grooves in the street as she reached forward, stretching until ligaments popped, but the carriage was moving faster, and she could not. From her right, shouting in a language she did not understand. Thunder of hooves. Kangji burst from an alley at a dead run, braids streaming, buckskin fringe flying. His eyes locked on the carriage with terrible intensity. She saw a rancher's hand dropping to his holster. Cowboys raising rifles. Dr. Archer shouting. And from the far end of town, a low rumble, many hooves, many animals. The stampede hit like the wrath of God. Longhorn cattle poured from the holding pen, 20 head eyes rolling white horns, tossing, driven by men firing pistols. The ground shook. Dust rose in choking clouds. The carriage rolled into their path. Genevieve screamed and clawed forward. Kangji ran faster. His hand shot out, grabbed the handle as the wheel hit a rut. The axle snapped with a gunshot crack. His momentum carried him forward, his grip the only thing keeping the carriage from tumbling. He twisted using his weight as the stampede split around them. A steer hit his shoulder, spinning him. He lost his grip. The carriage tilted. Then Genevieve was there, throwing her body across it, and together they hauled it back as the last cattle thundered past. In the sudden silence, Genevieve lifted Léonie with shaking hands. The baby was screaming, but unhurt. Genevieve clutched her daughter and made a sound without name or language. Kangji stood beside her shoulder, dislocated, not speaking. Across the street, Bill's hand rested on his holster, calculating. The crowd murmured uncertainly. Then a woman's voice cut through. I saw everything. Clarissa Finch stood on the telegraph office steps. Mr. Haskell deliberately released that carriage into a stampede he himself ordered. And I have ledgers that show why. Dr. Archer appeared beside them. My office, now. They moved quickly through back streets, reaching the alley behind the apothecary. Keep going, the doctor urged. North to the creek draw. I'll bring supplies after dark. Kangji was already moving, despite his injury, gesturing for Genevieve to follow. They slipped through gaps between buildings, over a fence, out onto open prairie. The August sun hammered down, but fear kept Genevieve moving. They reached the cottonwood draw 40 minutes later. Only then did Kangji stop sinking against a tree shoulder cradled. Genevieve set Léonie on soft grass and turned to him. Your shoulder? Dislocated? He nodded. She had watched her father treat injuries in Paris clinics. She knelt beside Kangji and spoke in her father's clinical tone. I must put it back. It will hurt, but only briefly. Do it. She positioned carefully, one hand on his elbow, the other on his wrist. Gentle traction pulling the arm at a specific angle. Then the joint slid home with a vibration, more felt than heard. Kangji's breath hissed, but he made no other sound. Good, he said. Then with ghost of humor, you have done this before. My father was a physician. I watched. I remembered. They sat in silence, listening to Leonie coo and the creek burble. The sounds were so peaceful that Genevieve felt something crack inside. I do not know how to thank you. You could have been killed. Kenji studied her. Not a stranger. A mother. I told you I do not forget what it means to watch a child stolen. Your sister's son. He nodded. Weste, 4 winters old, always laughing. Then the coughing sickness came. My sister carried him to the white doctor, but he would not see him. No money. She carried him to 3 more towns. By then, he stopped. By then, it was too late. He died in her arms. Tears pricked Genevieve's eyes. I am so sorry. It is why I helped you. Because I saw you crawling for your child, and I remembered my sister's face. And I thought if I do nothing, I am the same as that doctor. Before she could respond, Leonie fussed, hungry. Genevieve turned away to nurse. Kenji rose and moved to the creek, giving privacy. He returned with soaked shirt and dripping hair. The water is clean. You should drink. Wash the blood. She looked at her torn palms, scraped knees, showing through shredded dress. She had not noticed until now. The pain crashed over her. Kenji fashioned a cup from a folded leaf and brought water. It was cold and clean. While Leonie dozed, he gathered willow bark, showed her how to chew it into pulp. For pain and infection. My people have used it forever. He helped clean her injuries with creek water and cloth torn from his shirt, packing willow pulp against the deepest scrapes. His hands were careful, efficient, matter of fact. You know much about healing. I know what the elders taught me. It is not like your father's medicine, but it works sometimes. As shadows lengthened, they talked. Raw, honest exchange of people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable. Kenji spoke of his camp at Cold Creek, 40 Lakota, trying to live quietly in shrinking spaces. Of winters so cold, breath froze in beard summers when buffalo were scarce. Of treaties made in broken land, promised, then claimed by papers signed by distant men. Genevieve spoke of Paris, of her father's clinic treating factory workers and prostitutes. Of meeting Pierre, his American dreams, the boat journey that seemed like sailing toward hope. And now, Kenji asked, what do you hope for? She looked at sleeping Leonie. To keep her safe, to make Bill pay. I do not know if that is possible. It is possible. The woman with ledgers, Clarissa. The doctor said there is a mine man with evidence. If we gather proof, the sheriff is Bill's. The judge won't return for months. Who will listen? People listened when that woman spoke. I saw their faces. He paused. But you cannot stay here. Bill's men will search. We must move before dark. Move where? My camp. 2 days north. My people. He hesitated. They will not be happy. Bringing a white woman is dangerous. But they will not turn away a mother and child. Not if I ask. Genevieve considered. Going meant trusting him completely in a world she did not understand. Every fear her culture had instilled rose up. But she looked at his face, the pain he carried, the risk he had taken, and understood something fundamental this man had proven himself when everyone else turned away. I will go, if you will take us. He nodded. Then we leave now. They traveled through dusk, moving north. Kenji set a ground-eating pace. Genevieve struggled to keep up blistered feet, protesting, but she did not complain. At full dark, he let them stop in a wash. No fire. They ate hardtack and drank from his water skin, resting in shifts. During Genevieve's watch, she studied his sleeping face. Younger than she thought, perhaps 30. Strong features, long hair like black silk, scars on his arm and ribs. A man who had survived things she could only imagine. When dawn came, they continued north. The prairie seemed endless. Genevieve's feet bled inside her boots, but she forced herself onward. Leonie fussed, and Genevieve sang French lullabies. Kanji listened. The song is sad. It is a lullaby. In my language, we sing about eagle's flight, rabbit's cleverness, about the great hoop of the world. Your song speaks of sorrow. She listened to her own voice and realized he was right. Perhaps that is the difference. Yours teaches children they belong to the world. Mine teaches them the world is sorrowful and we must find what joy we can. Both can be true. The world is large enough for sorrow and eagles. They reached Cold Creek at sunset on the second day. Genevieve saw the camp from a distance, 12 hide teepees by the creek, where cottonwoods grew thick. Smoke rose from fires. Children played. It looked peaceful, domestic. Then faces turned toward them, and peace evaporated. Children were called to mothers' sides. Men appeared with weapons. Women's faces ranged from suspicious to hostile. Kangi spoke rapidly in Lakota hands, gesturing. An older man with gray braids and a face like weathered stone stepped forward. He studied Genevieve with dark eyes, revealing nothing, and then looked at Leonie, then back. Sharp exchange followed. A woman younger than Genevieve, with strong features and burning eyes, said something that made several people nod. Finally, Kanji turned. This is Chief Two Eagles, and this, gesturing to the angry woman, is my sister, Winema. Genevieve met Winema's burning gaze and understood immediately this woman saw her as a threat. They say you may stay 3 days, long enough to rest and plan. Then you must go. The risk of soldiers is too great. Do you understand? I understand. I am grateful. Two Eagles spoke again. He says you must work. We do not carry people who do not contribute. Can you fetch water? Help with hides. I can learn. Two Eagles nodded and turned away. Winema lingered, eyes moving from Genevieve to Leonie, with an expression so complex, pain and longing and anger mixed, that Genevieve felt something twist. I am sorry for the loss of your son. Winema's eyes widened. She said nothing, just turned and walked away, spine rigid. She needs time, Kanji said. Weste was her only child. The grief is fresh. Where should I? You will sleep in my sister's teepee. She lives alone now. I will stay with unmarried men. He paused. It is better. Less talk. Genevieve felt her cheeks heat as she understood. Of course, there would be talk about a white woman and Lakota man traveling together. Thank you for thinking of that. Survival requires thinking of many things. The next days were strange and difficult. She woke each morning in Winema's teepee, a space still holding traces of the dead child, carved toy small moccasins, and emerged to find the camp already working. Women put her to work immediately. Not unkindly, but without gentleness. She was shown how to carry water in skin bags, a task requiring careful hip balance. She spilled most of it on her first attempt. The women exchanged glances that communicated volumes. On her second try, an older woman demonstrated proper technique. It helped. Genevieve made it halfway before spilling. By day's end, her back ached, and she had spilled more than she transported, but she had earned something like grudging respect. The work continued. She learned to scrape hides, back-breaking labor, leaving hands cramping, to pound meat strips for pemmican, to keep fires burning at right temperature, to stay silent when men spoke in council. She learned the Lakota were not savages newspapers taught her to fear. They were simply people with different customs, but same concerns, keeping children fed, elders, comfortable community, safe. Leonie seemed to thrive. The constant presence of children fascinated her. Women, despite wariness of Genevieve, could not resist a baby. Several times Genevieve found her daughter held by strangers crooning in Lakota. Wainama never held Leonie, but she often positioned herself to watch the baby. Once Genevieve saw her reach toward Leonie's curls before pulling back and walking away quickly. On the second evening, Genevieve and Kanji talked privately. He found her by the creek, soaking aching feet while Leonie slept. "You did well today," the women notice. "They notice I am slow and clumsy. They notice you keep trying. That matters more." He paused. "Tomorrow, Dr. Archer meets us 3 miles south. He brings evidence ledgers, documents from the mine. We will need to plan. And then, we go back to Rock Creek and fight. We cannot run forever. You need your land, and Bill needs to answer. He has the sheriff, armed men. What do we have? Truth. And people tired of being afraid. I saw it in their faces. The spell is breaking. We just need to break it completely." It was the first time he used her given name. The sound did something strange to her pulse. "I do not know if I am brave enough. You crawled through the street under a stampede. Do not tell me you are not brave." That was desperation. Sometimes they are the same. He looked at her directly, and in fading light, his eyes were very dark. "I will not lie. What we plan is dangerous. Bill will not give up power easily. People may die. You may die. I may die. But I would rather die fighting than live knowing I stood aside." Genevieve thought of Pierre, of his gentleness and dreams, and how little good either did him. She thought of Leonie and what world she would grow up in if men like Bill ruled through fear. "Then we fight, and we do not stop until he answers for every life destroyed." Kangi nodded slowly. Then, carefully giving her time to pull away, he placed his hand over hers on her knee. His palm was warm and callous, the touch entirely chaste, yet somehow more intimate than anything Pierre had done. They sat that way for a long moment, in gathering dark creek murmuring beside them. When Wainama's voice called sharply in Lakota, Kanji pulled away and rose. "She calls you to help prepare evening meal. I will see you tomorrow at first light." He left before she could respond, melting into shadows. Genevieve sat longer, feeling the ghost of his touch and wondering what she was becoming. Not the woman from Paris with civilization dreams. Not the widow who knelt and begged. Something else. Something harder and perhaps more real. She rose, adjusted Leonie, and went to help people who were not yet friends, but might become allies in the fight to come. But that night, as she tried to sleep, Wainama appeared in the teepee entrance, carrying a fresh deerskin. She knelt beside Genevieve and spoke in halting English. "Tomorrow you learn to make this ready, to tan the hide. It is hard work. You will fail many times. But you must learn." It was not quite kindness, but it was instruction. Teaching instead of rejection. "I will try my best. Best is not enough. You must succeed." Wainama's eyes were hard. "My brother risks much for you. You understand, if soldiers come because of you, my people die. So you must be worth the risk." The words stung, but they were fair. "I understand." Wainama nodded and left. The next morning, Genevieve was led to where fresh hides were stretched on frames. The older women demonstrated scraping technique, firm pressure at the right angle to remove flesh without damaging skin. It looked straightforward. It was not. Genevieve's first attempt tore a hole straight through the hide. The women made disapproving sounds. She tried again on a second skin, working more carefully. This time she scraped too lightly and left strips of flesh that would rot and ruin the leather. Wainama appeared, took the scraping tool from Genevieve's hands, and demonstrated with sharp, precise strokes. Then she thrust the tool back. Again. For hours, Genevieve worked under Winnemaa's unforgiving gaze. Her hands cramped, her shoulders screamed, sweat poured down her face despite the morning cool. On her fifth attempt, she finally began to get the rhythm right, firm enough to remove flesh, gentle enough not to tear. "Better," Winnemaa said grudgingly. "But still not good. Keep a-working." By afternoon, Genevieve's hands were bleeding from gripping the tool. She had ruined 2 more hides, learning what not to do. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she did not stop. She worked through the pain, through the mistakes, through Winnemaa's sharp Lakota words that she did not need translation to understand as criticism. Finally, as the sun began its descent, she finished a hide properly clean on both sides, no tears ready for the tanning process. She held it up with shaking hands. Winnemaa examined it critically, turning it over, checking edges. Then she nodded once. "Good. Tomorrow you do 3 more. It was the closest thing to praise Genevieve would receive, and she treasured it. That evening, sitting with other women preparing food, Genevieve noticed subtle shift. They still did not speak to her much, but they made space for her at the fire. When she struggled with an unfamiliar cooking technique, hands appeared to guide hers without words. She was being accepted slowly as someone who would work despite pain and failure. Late that night, unable to sleep from aching muscles, Genevieve emerged from the teepee to find Kangji sitting by a low fire outside the camp circle. "You should be resting," he said as she approached. "I cannot. My hands hurt too much." He examined her torn palms in the firelight, then disappeared into his shelter and returned with a clay pot of pungent salve. He spread it on her hands with gentle efficiency. "This will help. My grandmother's recipe." The salve stung at first, then soothed. They sat in comfortable silence for a time. Finally, Kangji spoke. "Winnemaa told me you worked hard today, that you did not complain or quit even when you failed. I ruined several hides learning. Failure is how we learn. She knows that. What matters is that you kept trying." He paused. "She is beginning to respect you, I think. That is not easy to earn." She loved her son very much. Yes, and when he died, part of her died also. She has not forgiven the world for taking him. I do not know if she ever will. I understand that kind of grief. I know you do. That is why. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. That is why I think maybe you are the one person who truly understands what this fight means. Not just getting your child back, but making sure what happened to Waste does not happen again. To anyone. Genevieve looked at this man who carried so much pain, yet still chose to help others. Tomorrow we meet Dr. Archer. We look at the evidence, and then we decide how to break Bill's power. Yes. Kangji met her eyes. Together. That single word felt like a vow. They met Dr. Archer at the old hunting camp at dawn. With him came Arthur Rowland, pale coughing, looking like someone about to confess mortal sin. "Mrs. Laurent, I should have come forward sooner. I was afraid. I have a daughter in St. Louis." He stopped. "That's not an excuse. Just the truth." "Tell her," Dr. Archer urged. Arthur spread maps on the ground. Official map filed with inspectors. Shows legal boundaries. He pulled out a second sheet covered in pencil marks. Real map. Shows where we actually dug. Genevieve studied the penciled tunnels spreading like tree roots far beyond legal boundaries. One drift marked with thick double line stretched under land labeled with her name. "He has been mining under my property. 8 months. Rich vein. But he couldn't claim it openly outside legal boundaries. So he ran it quietly using men paid extra to keep silent. Kanji pointed to 3 crosses marked on the tunnel. What is this? Arthur's face went gray. Where the tunnel collapsed, 6 months ago. 3 men died. Bill ordered it sealed with explosives. He paused. The support timbers were spaced too far apart to save money. It was an accident. It was negligence. Dr. Archer leaned forward. If those bodies are found under your land, Bill hangs. That's why he needs it. Not just for silver. To bury evidence permanently. Genevieve felt sick. 3 families. Martinez left a widow and 2 children. Chen had a pregnant wife. Dakota Pete had no one we knew of. But they were men. They deserved better than being sealed in darkness and forgotten. Silence stretched. Finally, Kanji spoke. Then we have evidence. Forged note, illegal tunnels, hidden bodies. But no judge for 3 months, Dr. Archer said. And Bill owns the sheriff. It was Arthur who suggested, what if we bypass official channels, call a town meeting old mining camp style, present everything publicly? Bill relies on secrecy. If everyone sees evidence at once, if miners realize their friends were killed through his negligence, they would tear him apart, Kanji said flatly. And soldiers would use it as excuse to clear all Lakota from the territory. White violence they ignore. But if my people are involved, it becomes uprising. Then my people stay back, Genevieve said firmly. This is my fight. You have done enough. I will not let your people pay the price. Kanji's eyes flashed. You think you can face Bill's guns alone? I think you know I am right. If your people are involved, the army will use it for things far worse. Tension stretched between them. Dr. Archer cleared his throat. There may be another way. Bill's power comes from fear. But he showed vulnerability the Stampede day people were shaken. If we build on that, create pressure, his bought officials can't protect him from... He trailed off. We need one more piece, something undeniable. Arthur's face went thoughtful. The ledger. There's a second ledger. Rumor says Bill keeps complete records of every bribe, every threat, every piece of leverage. Insurance if anyone turns on him. Where would he keep it? His office, most likely. Mine or saloon. But both are locked, watched. Kanji studied the mine map. The mine has other entrances, ventilation tunnels, emergency exits. There's an air shaft 1/2 mile from main entrance. And an old north tunnel we don't use kept flooding. But they're sealed or too small for a man. Not too small for me. If you can show which tunnel leads to the office. Absolutely not, Genevieve said sharply. You said your people cannot be involved. Now you want to break into Bill's mine. I will not be caught. And I am not doing this for you. Bill represents everything poisoning this territory. Breaking his power helps my people as much as yours. Dr. Archer hesitated. He's right. Bill has been squeezing Lakota trappers, demanding fees for land they've used for generations. And he paused. I heard through Medical Network Bill has been talking to territorial officials about clearing the indigenous population for mining expansion. If he gains more land and power, he might actually do it. Wynema, who had followed them unnoticed, spoke in halting English. You say this, he would drive us from our land. Dr. Archer met her eyes. I'm sorry, yes, that's what I heard. Wynema's hand moved to her knife. Then we kill him. Tonight. Quietly. And the soldiers come, Kanji countered. And 20 die for one man's crimes. No, we do this right. We expose him, let his own people turn on him, make the truth so public no one can twist it. The plan emerged. Clarissa would organize a community assembly at the church. Kanji would infiltrate the mine and find the ledger. Wynema and scouts would watch roads for soldiers. And Genevieve would be the bait, walking openly into town to draw Bill's attention. The infiltration began 3 hours before dawn. Kangji moved through darkness with absolute certainty. The north tunnel entrance was exactly where Arthur promised, narrow opening half hidden by scrub oak, sealed with rotted timbers. He pried them apart slowly, listening. Nothing but wind and distant coyote. The opening was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He exhaled completely and squeezed through into darkness so complete it felt solid. He moved by touch alone, one hand on wall feet, testing each step. Arthur had warned the tunnel floods and never fully drains. Water rose to Kangji's ankles, then knees, then waist. The cold seeped through leather into bone. He pushed forward, counting paces. 50 to the branch. Left fork. 30 to where it climbs. The water deepened. By the climbing section, it was nearly chest-high walls narrowed until his shoulders scraped stone on both sides. The cold was numbing, making fingers clumsy. He forced himself forward, counting paces with precision of a man who understood one wrong turn meant death. 70 paces. The tunnel should widen. It did not. Solid stone ahead. Behind him, water seemed to rise faster. Panic flickered. He had counted wrong, or Arthur's map was inaccurate, or the tunnel had collapsed. He forced slow breathing. He had come 70 paces. Arthur said 80 to the widening, then sharp left turn. 10 more paces. He moved forward, water now chest high, so cold it felt like knives. 8 paces. 9. 10. His hand found empty space. The tunnel widened right in a direction Arthur had not mentioned because it did not exist on official maps. Kangji squeezed through an opening that scraped skin from shoulders. Suddenly, the water level dropped. He was climbing steeply. Water fell to ankle depth, then just damp stone. He continued upward until his head struck wood above. A trap door. He pushed gently. It did not budge. Something heavy rested on top. He braced shoulders and pushed with all strength. The door lifted an inch, then 2, then fell back with muffled thud. He tried again, wedging knife blade to hold it open while shifting position. On third attempt, whatever rested on top slid aside with scraping sound, impossibly loud. Kangji froze, listening. No shouts, no footsteps. Just water dripping somewhere below. He pushed fully open and pulled himself into a storage room. Thin light showed under a door at the far end. He moved to it, pressed ear against wood. Silence. Eased it open a crack. Beyond was larger space, natural hollow incorporated into mine. Darkness was fractionally less absolute here. Ventilation shafts above allowed barest whisper of approaching dawn. He let eyes adjust. Shapes emerged, timbers, ore carts, tool racks. And at far end, a rough door with lamplight seeping around edges. Voices came from beyond. 2 men talking low. Told him the veins played out, but he won't believe it. Wants us to keep digging west. West under Laurent's land, that's illegal as hell. Since when does Bill care, besides the widow's dead or run off? Bill'll have that deed within the week. Voices moved away, footsteps fading. Kangji waited until certain they were gone, and then approached the lighted door. Simple lock. He felt along door frame until he found a gap where wood warped from stone. Knife blade inserted. Careful pressure. The lock's tongue slid back with soft click. The office was small, cluttered desk covered in paper shelves with ledgers and equipment-locked cabinet. Kangji stood in doorway, listening, ensuring he was alone. Searching by touch and faint lamplight was agonizing. Papers crinkled. He sorted through documents he could not read well, looking for something significant. Nothing on the desk. The locked cabinet, then. He worked on it with his knife. The metal was newer, harder. It took longer. His fingers were still numb from cold water. A sound from the tunnel. Footsteps. Lamplight growing stronger. Kangji abandoned the cabinet and moved to shadows behind the door, pressing flat against wall. His hand moved to knife at belt. He did not want to kill, but if discovered, he might have no choice. The lamplight spilled in, and with it came Lightning Bill Haskell. Bill set his lamp on the desk and moved immediately to the locked cabinet. Kangji watched from behind the door as Bill produced a key from his vest and opened it with practiced ease. Inside were 3 ledgers bound in black leather. Bill removed the center one, set it on desk, began leafing through pages. After a moment, he smiled that cold, satisfied expression and produced a pen. He made a notation, blue on wet ink, returned the book to its place. Then he locked it again, pocketed the key, and turned to leave. Kangji held absolutely still as Bill passed within 3 feet. The lamplight threw wild shadows. For one terrible moment, Kangji's shadow merged with those shapes. It seemed about to betray him. But Bill was preoccupied, muttering about numbers and shares. He passed through the door, his footsteps fading light, dying. Kangji waited until he could hear nothing but his own heartbeat. Then he moved to the cabinet. Knowing Bill had just opened it, knowing exactly how it worked, it took Kangji perhaps 20 seconds to pick it open. The 3 ledgers sat in a row. He pulled out the center one and carried it to where the lamp still burned low. By that faint light, he opened the ledger and found what Arthur promised, page after page of names and numbers. He could not read all the English, but he understood the structure, amounts, dates, names. And beside many names, small notations, debt, leverage, threat, compliance purchased. This was it. Bill's insurance, his record of every person he controlled and exactly how. Kangji closed it and was about to tuck it inside his shirt when he heard voices again. Multiple voices this time from the main tunnel. The day shift arriving early. He could not go back the way he came. Too slow, too exposed. The voices grew louder, accompanied by many boots on stone. His eyes fell on a narrow ventilation shaft in the ceiling, perhaps 2 feet square, leading upward into darkness. Barely large enough. But his only chance. He grabbed the ledger, shoved it inside his shirt, and climbed onto the desk. The lamp wobbled dangerously. He reached up and pulled himself into the shaft, ignoring stone-scraping shoulders raw, ignoring ribs, compressing painfully as he wedged himself upward. The shaft climbed steeply for perhaps 15 feet, then turned horizontal. Kangji wormed forward inch by agonizing inch, ledger pressed against chest. Behind and below, someone's been in here. The lamp's still warm. Search the tunnels. Find them. Now. Kangji kept moving. The horizontal section seemed endless. His shoulders bled now, leaving a trail anyone could follow if they looked up. But he could not go back and could not stop. Finally, the shaft opened into another vertical climb. Kangji pulled himself upward, using knees and elbows, climbing toward distant gray square that could only be dawn breaking outside. The shaft ended at a metal grate, rusted and ancient. He braced his back against one side and kicked with both feet. Once, twice. On third kick, it tore free with screech of metal and tumbled away. Kangji pulled himself onto the mountainside into cold gray dawn, covered in blood and mud and stone dust. The mine was below perhaps a quarter mile. He could hear shouting Bill's men organizing search. But Kangji had the ledger pressed against his chest, and he had his life, and he had the truth. He ran down the mountain toward where his horse waited, hidden in scrub oak, ran until his lungs burned and his legs trembled, ran until Rock Creek was behind him, and Cold Creek was ahead, ran until he was certain no one had followed. Only then did he stop, pull out the ledger, and examine it more carefully in growing daylight. What he saw made his blood run cold. Page after page of names. Families who owed money, officials who took bribes, men who witnessed things they should not have and were paid to forget, miners who were injured, then given compensation that was hush money. and near the back, territorial expansion, Indian removal, approved routes for railroad development. Bill Haskell was not just a corrupt mine owner. He was part of something larger, a network systematically stealing land, silencing opposition, building wealth on backs of anyone too poor or powerless to fight. And now, Kangji held the proof. He remounted and rode hard for Rock Creek, the ledger secure against his chest, dawn breaking like a promise behind him. Genevieve walked into Rock Creek at mid-morning, 2 days later, alone, except for Leonie strapped to her chest, and the town seemed to hold its breath. She had debated this through sleepless nights. Dr. Archer wanted her to wait until they had all evidence assembled. But Genevieve understood Bill was wounded now, his control slipping. Better to press the advantage while his attention was divided. She walked down the main street, spine straight, head high, watching faces turn. Recognition dawning. People making calculations acknowledge her or pretend they had not seen. Most chose pretense. They turned away, suddenly fascinated by shop windows. But a few, very few, nodded. The woman whose husband died in the mine. The merchant whose son borrowed from Bill. A young mother with children at her skirts. Small acknowledgments, but they gave Genevieve courage to keep walking. She reached the church where Clarissa had organized the assembly. The school teacher waited on the steps, pale but determined. "You came." "I said I would." Dr. Archer sent word. "Kangji got the ledger. He's bringing it now, should be here any moment." She glanced nervously down the street. But Bill knows something is happening. He's called in men from his ranch. There are at least 25 armed men in town. This could turn ugly very quickly. It is already ugly. We are simply making it visible. They went inside together. The church was simple whitewashed boards and rough pews, but it had something Bill's saloon did not, a pulpit. A symbol of moral authority, however, eroded by compromise and fear. People began arriving around 11. Miners with wives and older children. They filed in quietly, taking seats without talking much, faces showing careful neutrality of people who had learned not to express opinions where Bill's men might watch. By noon, perhaps 60 people had gathered. Sheriff Webb appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. He spotted Genevieve and his jaw tightened, but he did not move to arrest her. Instead, he took a seat in back and stared ahead. That small act gave Genevieve a spark of hope. At 12:30, Kangji arrived. He slipped through the side door, moving quietly, despite obvious exhaustion. His clothes were torn and bloodied, face scratched from rock, but his eyes were bright with something like triumph. He pulled the ledger from inside his shirt and handed it to Clarissa without a word. Her hands shook as she opened it. She read for perhaps 2 minutes, face going progressively paler. Then she looked up. "This is it. Everything. Every bribe, every threat, every piece of leverage for 5 years. Her voice grew stronger. "And there's more. Plans. He's been coordinating with territorial officials to clear Lakota lands for railroad development. Contracts already drawn up, payments scheduled to men in the territorial legislature." The church door slammed open with force that shook the building. Lightning Bill Haskell stood in the doorway, backlit by noon's sun, with at least 15 armed men fanned out behind him. His face was dark with barely controlled rage, but his voice was still controlled, the voice of a man who believed his authority was absolute. "This assembly is illegal. Gathering to conspire against lawful business interests is grounds for arrest. I'm shutting this down. Everyone out. Now." Nobody moved. Bill's pale eyes swept the room and found Genevieve. Something ugly flickered, not just anger, but wounded vanity, the rage of a man defied by someone he considered beneath him. "Mrs. Laurent, you're under arrest for theft, trespassing, and conspiracy. Sheriff Webb, do your duty." The sheriff stood slowly. He looked at Bill, then at Genevieve, then at the crowd watching with careful attention. His hand did not move toward his gun. On what specific charge? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who needs to answer questions. Bill's facade cracked visibly. I just told you. No, Dr. Archer interrupted, standing. You made accusations, but I have evidence. Physical evidence that the promissory note you tried to collect was forged. Different ink, different handwriting. That's fraud, Bill. Criminal fraud, and I have this. Clarissa held up the black ledger. Your own handwriting documenting every illegal thing you've done for 5 years. Bribes, threats, illegal mining operations that killed 3 men and then buried them to hide evidence. Arthur Rowland stood face pale but voice firm. Those 3 men, Jacob Martinez, Thomas Chen, Dakota Pete, died because you ordered us to skip support timbers to save money. I have the original instructions in your handwriting, and I know where the bodies are buried. Under Mrs. Laurent's land in an illegal tunnel, you ran to steal silver. A murmur ran through the miners. Several stood, faces hardening. Jacob was my brother, one man said, voice shaking. You told me it was an accident. You paid me $50. Was that a lie? Bill's hand moved to his holster. The men behind him shifted, rifles coming up. Careful, Kangji said quietly from beside the pulpit. He had not moved, had not drawn any weapon, but something in his voice made everyone pay attention. You are in a church, in front of witnesses, 60 people who will testify to what happens here. My story. Bill's voice rose, control finally slipping. You're a thief and a savage who broke into my mine. I touched no one, Kangji said calmly. I climbed through water and stone and took only what was yours to begin with the truth about what you are. And what I am, Bill snarled, is the man who built this town, who created jobs, brought prosperity. These people owe me everything. We owe you nothing, a woman's voice rang out. Mrs. Chen stood pregnant, belly visible, 3 children at her skirts. You killed my husband with your greed. You paid me $20 and told me to be grateful. $20 for a man's life. Other voices joined hers. The widow Martinez, the merchant whose business Bill ruined, the miners who had worked for docked wages. One by one they stood and named grievances, and the accumulated weight of Bill's crimes spilled out in a torrent that could not be stopped. Bill's face went from red to pale. His hand was still on his gun, but Genevieve could see the calculation in his eyes. He was outnumbered now. Not by weapons, his men still had guns, but by voices, by witnesses, by the simple fact that his power had always been built on silence, and the silence had finally broken. This is mutiny. All of you are finished. I have friends in the capital. I have leverage. Your leverage is in that ledger, Clarissa said. And your friends are named right here with dates and amounts. I wonder how they'll feel when a federal marshal comes asking about bribes and illegal land seizures. Bill's hand tightened on his gun. For a moment, Genevieve thought he might actually start shooting in a church full of witnesses, driven by desperation to do something irredeemably stupid. But then Sheriff Webb stood and pulled his own weapon, aiming not at Kangji or Genevieve, but at Bill. Put it down, Bill. It's over. You've got no play left. Bill looked at the sheriff, the man who had been his creature for years, and something broke in his face. Not surrender, not even acceptance. Just rabid desperation, the look of a cornered animal that knew it was dying and wanted only to take someone with it. Over, he repeated softly. No, not while I'm still breathing. He drew in one smooth motion, the revolver rising toward Genevieve, because she was the visible symbol of his humiliation, the foreign widow who had dared to defy him. 3 things happened, almost simultaneously. Kanji moved fast as a striking snake, putting himself between Bill and Genevieve. Sheriff Webb fired the shot impossibly loud in the enclosed space, and Bill's finger tightened on the trigger. The bullet from Bill's gun went wild, punching through the church wall above the crowd's heads. Bill stumbled backward, a red stain spreading across his shoulder where the sheriff's bullet caught him. His remaining men froze, unsure whether to return fire or flee. "The next one goes through your heart." Webb set his hand steady despite the shake. "Drop it. Now." Bill looked at his gun, at the blood spreading down his arm, at faces of people who had feared him just days ago, and now stared with nothing but contempt. He looked at Genevieve, and what she saw in his eyes was not hatred, but incomprehension. He genuinely could not understand how this had happened, how his perfect system of control had collapsed so completely. And then, instead of dropping the gun, Bill turned and ran. He shoved through his own men, knocking aside those who tried to stop him, and burst out of the church into the bright afternoon. "He's heading for the livery," someone yelled. Kanji was already moving Genevieve close behind, despite Dr. Archer's protest. They emerged into the street, in time to see Bill vault onto a horse, not even his own, just the nearest saddled mount, and kick it into a gallop toward the eastern edge of town, toward the river. "He's running for the ferry," Arthur shouted, pointing. "If he crosses, he can reach the territorial road. He'll disappear." "Not if we stop him," Kanji said grimly. He ran for his own horse tied near the church. Genevieve followed without hesitation. The chase that followed was brutal and desperate. A mad gallop through Rock Creek streets while people scattered and Bill's remaining men fired sporadic shots that went wide. Bill's horse thundered down the main street, hooves throwing up clouds of choking dust. He leaned low over the saddle, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, the other gripping reins with desperate strength. His coat flapped behind him like black wings. Kanji's paint mare exploded into pursuit, Genevieve clinging to his back, with Leonie secure against her chest. The baby was screaming now, terrified by the noise and speed, but there was no time to comfort her, no time for anything except the pursuit. They rounded the corner past the mercantile and nearly collided with a freight wagon being unloaded. Kanji yanked the reins hard, left the mare's hooves skidding in loose dirt, tilting at a dangerous angle before recovering. Behind them, one of Bill's men on a slower horse was not as quick. He hit the wagon broadside, horse and rider, both going down in a tangle of thrashing limbs and splintering wood. "Hold tighter," Kanji shouted back to Genevieve as they pounded past the blacksmith's forge. A bullet whined past Genevieve's ear, so close she felt the heat of its passage. She turned her head and saw another of Bill's loyalists, a ranch hand she recognized from that day in her yard, taking aim from the boardwalk for a second shot. The man's rifle cracked. The bullet struck the wooden post inches from Kangi's head, sending splinters flying. Without breaking stride, Kangi drew his own rifle one-handed from the saddle scabbard, twisted in his seat, and fired back in one fluid motion. The ranch hand dove for cover as the bullet shattered the window behind him. Kangi's shot had not been meant to kill, just to disrupt, to slow their pursuer. It worked. The man scrambled away, abandoning the chase. They burst from between two buildings into the open space before the river landing. Bill was perhaps 50 yards ahead now, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He glanced back once, his face twisted with rage and desperation, then kicked his mount even harder. The ferry landing came into view, a rough wooden platform extending into the brown water, and beside it, the flatboat ferry suspended on thick rope cables that stretched across the 30-yard width of the Missouri River. The current was strong here, the water deep and dangerous, with hidden snags and eddies. Dutch Henry, the old ferryman, stood at the windlass that controlled the ropes. His weathered face showed alarm as Bill thundered up, but Bill did not slow. He fired 2 shots, one into the air, one at the ground near the old man's feet, and Dutch Henry scrambled back, hands raised. Bill dismounted at a run, nearly falling as his wounded shoulder gave way. But he caught himself on the ferry's railing. He led his trembling horse onto the platform, then turned and fired 3 more shots back toward Kangji and Genevieve. The bullets whined past one close enough that Genevieve felt the air displace against her cheek, another kicking up dirt at the mare's hooves. Kangji pulled his horse to a sliding stop at the landing and dismounted in one fluid motion. Bill was already working the windlass, with his good arm pulling the ferry away from the shore. The platform lurched as the current caught it swinging slightly on its tether ropes. "Kangji, don't," Akrikar, Genevieve shouted as she saw him preparing to jump. "The water is too fast, you will drown." But Kangji did not jump into the water. Instead, he ran along the shore to where the ferry's control rope was anchored to a massive oak tree. The rope was thick as a man's wrist, stretched taut by the weight of the ferry and the relentless pull of the current. Bill saw what he intended and raised his gun, firing twice more. One bullet kicked up dirt at Kangji's feet. The other took a chunk out of the oak tree, inches from his head bark, exploding in a shower of splinters. Kangji ignored them both. He pulled out his knife, the same blade that had picked locks in the mine, that had saved him in the ventilation shaft, and began sawing at the rope with fierce, rapid strokes. The rope was thick and resistant, but Kangji's blade was sharp, and his desperation gave him strength. The outer strands began to part with small popping sounds. "No, Bill screamed from the ferry, understanding too late what was happening. "Don't you dare, you savage!" The rope parted with a sound like a whip crack that echoed across the water. The ferry, suddenly freed from half its support, swung violently sideways. The remaining rope, now bearing all the weight and fighting all the current, began to unravel strand by strand with sharp snapping sounds, like bones breaking. Bill dropped his gun and grabbed for the railing with both hands as the platform tilted at a crazy angle, the wounded shoulder forgotten in his terror. His horse screamed a high-piercing sound of animal panic and tried to rear on the tilting platform. Its hooves slipped on wet wood. The movement made the ferry rock more violently, each oscillation threatening to pitch everything into the brown water below. Bill held on with one hand while reaching desperately with the other for something at his saddle. A heavy leather satchel that had been tied there, bulging with papers, and what looked like gold coins and watches and other valuables, all the portable wealth he had managed to grab in his panicked flight. "Let it go." Genevieve heard herself shouting across the water, though she knew he could not hear her over the roar of the current and the screaming horse. "Just hold on with both hands." But Bill Haskell had never been a man who could let anything go. His fingers closed on the satchel strap, and he pulled it toward himself, and the weight of gold and papers dragging him off balance. The ferry gave another violent lurch as the second rope began to fray, individual strands popping like gunshots. Bill looked directly at Genevieve across the water, and his mouth moved, forming words she could not hear. His pale eyes were wide with something that might have been fear or rage, or simply disbelief that the world would dare to do this to him. Then the second rope snapped. The ferry did not sink immediately. It was too shallow for that, the wooden platform staying afloat even as it spun in the current, like a leaf in a gutter. But Bill overbalanced by the weight of his precious satchel, and standing on a platform that was no longer level or stable, pitched sideways. He had a choice. In that final second, one choice, one moment, drop the satchel and use both hands to grab the railing or keep hold of his wealth. He chose the wealth. His fingers never opened. The satchel's weight pulled him off the tilting ferry and into the Missouri's brown water with a splash that was swallowed immediately by the river's roar. For a moment, his head bobbed up his free hand, reaching toward the sky as if he could somehow pull himself out by sheer will. His mouth opened in a cry that Genevieve could not hear. The satchel dragged at his shoulder, pulling him down. The current was merciless here, fast and cold and full of hidden dangers, drowned trees and rocks that could trap a man underwater until he stopped struggling, until the river claimed him fully, and finally, Bill surfaced once more 20 yards downstream, his hand still clutching the satchel strap with a grip even death had not yet loosened. His eyes found Genevieve's one final time across the distance. Then the current pulled him under again, and this time he did not surface. The Missouri River in late summer was not especially deep, but it was fast and it was cold, and it was utterly indifferent to the struggles of men who thought they could control everything. Bill's body would wash up miles downstream, if it was ever found at all, still clutching his leather satchel full of gold and leverage, and all the power that had meant everything to him, and nothing to the river. Genevieve stood on the landing, holding Leonie close, and felt absolutely nothing. Not triumph, not relief, not even satisfaction. Just a hollow emptiness, where fear and rage had been burning for so long that their absence felt strange and disorienting. Kangi walked back from the oak tree, knife still in his hand, his face unreadable in the afternoon light. Is he? Genevieve could not finish the question. He chose greed over his life, Kangi said simply, quietly, without drama or satisfaction. That choice killed him. Not me. Not you. Him. Behind them, the people of Rock Creek began to gather at the landing, miners and merchants and families who had lived under Bill's shadow for years. They stood in silence, watching the empty river, where the ferry platform still spun slowly in the current. And gradually, the weight of it seemed to settle over them. Like a physical thing, he was gone. Lightning Bill Haskell, who had controlled their lives through fear and debt and violence, was gone. Someone started to cheer, but the sound died quickly, awkwardly. This was not a moment for celebration. Too many people had died. Too much had been lost. Bill's death did not undo any of that, did not restore the years of fear or bring back the dead or heal the wounds his greed had carved into the community. Sheriff Webb arrived, breathing hard from running, his face flushed. He looked at the empty ferry spinning in the current, then at Kangi, then at the frayed rope still tied to the oak tree. What happened here? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and was only asking for the record. He ran, Kangi said. He chose to run rather than face what he had done. The rope was old and frayed. The current was too strong, and the river took him. It was not quite the whole truth, but it was true enough. The rope had been old and frayed. The current was strong, and Bill's own choices to run, to cling to his wealth, to refuse to let go, even when letting go, meant life had killed him as surely as if he had put a gun to his own head. Webb nodded slowly, seeming to accept this version. I'll need statements. From all of you, but... He looked at Genevieve, and something like genuine regret crossed his weathered face. For what it's worth, Mrs. Laurent, I'm sorry. For not standing up sooner. For letting it get this far. I should have been better than I was. We all should have been, Arthur Rowland said, joining them at the landing. Every one of us who stayed silent, who looked away, who told ourselves it wasn't our business. He looked at the water at the place where Bill had disappeared. But it's over now. And we have a chance to do better. To be better. Can we? Clarissa asked quietly, still holding the black ledger. Can we really fix what he broke? Or will someone else just take his place? No one had a good answer for that. Good answer for. The future was uncertain, the path forward unclear. But at least Genevieve thought they would walk that path without Bill Haskell's shadow falling across it. The weeks that followed were not neat or simple. Bill's death did not magically heal Rock Creek's wounds or restore what had been taken. But slowly, painfully, the town began the work of rebuilding what greed had corroded. The territorial authorities came a federal marshal and a court official, and everyone gave statements that stretched over several exhausting days. The sealed tunnel was opened under careful supervision. The bodies of Jacob Martinez, Thomas Chen, and Dakota Pete were finally recovered and given proper burial. Their families wept over graves that should have been dug 6 months earlier. The Black Ledger became evidence in multiple investigations. Several territorial officials resigned rather than face corruption charges. Others were arrested. The ripples spread far beyond Rock Creek, exposing a web of corruption that had been poisoning the entire territory. Sheriff Clayton Webb kept his position, but under strict oversight from the marshal's office. He worked with quiet determination to restore some measure of honor to the badge he had tarnished. Bill's assets were liquidated in a public sale. The miners took over the mine themselves, running it together and sharing the profits among the men who actually did the dangerous work underground. Arthur Rowland stayed on as supervisor, working to make the operation safer and more transparent, bearing the weight of his earlier silence like visible penance. The saloon was purchased by a group of merchants and renamed the River House. It operated without the predatory practices that had made the Dust Lantern notorious. And Genevieve's land, the piece of property that had started everything, was legally confirmed as hers. The illegal tunnel was sealed permanently, and a memorial marker was placed at the site, identifying it as the resting place of 3 men who had died for another man's greed. 3 weeks after Bill's death, Genevieve stood at that marker one evening with Kanji beside her and Leonie playing in the grass nearby, chasing grasshoppers with the focused determination only toddlers possess. "I keep thinking there should be more," Genevieve said quietly. "More justice. More something. He destroyed so many lives, and in the end he just drowned. It feels too quick. Death is never quick for the one dying." Kengi said, his voice thoughtful. "He was drowning for perhaps 2 minutes, maybe 3. That is a long time to know you are dying and to understand that your own choices brought you there. Long enough to feel every moment of regret if he was capable of regret. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps." Genevieve was not entirely convinced, but she understood what Kanji meant. Justice was not always about the quantity of suffering. Sometimes it was simply about the ending matching the life that preceded it. A man who valued gold above all else, drowning because he could not let go of gold. There was a symmetry to it, even if it felt incomplete. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Return to your people." "Eventually. But first..." He pulled something from his shirt, a rolled paper with an official-looking seal. "The territorial governor, trying to make amends for the corruption Bill exposed, has offered permanent hunting and trading rights to my people for land along Cold Creek. In writing. Legal and binding. It is not much, but it is more than we had before." "That is wonderful news." "Yes." He paused, seemed to gather himself. "And there is something else. Something I want to show you. Here on your land." The next day they rode out together, Genevieve, Kanji, and Winema, who Kanji had specifically asked to join them. The 3 of them rode in comfortable silence across the prairie, with Leonie secure in a cradle board that Winema had made decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken hours of painstaking work. When they reached the ridge behind Genevieve's cabin, Kanji dismounted and gestured for the others to follow. He unrolled the new survey map the territorial office had provided. "The new boundaries are marked clearly here," he said. "And according to this official map, the ridge where my ancestors are buried falls just inside your legal property claim." Genevieve studied the map and felt something tighten in her chest as the implications became clear. "I see. In white law, this means you own even the bones of my people." Kangji continued, his voice carefully neutral. You could do anything with this land, build here, mine here, plow the graves under if you wished. The law would support your right to do so. I would never. I know. Kangji's voice softened. But I need you to understand what I am asking. I need this to be your choice, freely made, not something you do because you feel you owe me or because you pity us. This must be your decision. What are you asking? Kangji pulled a wooden stake from his pack, one of the official boundary markers the surveyor had left. I am asking you to mark where your property ends and where sacred ground begins. To put it in writing with legal documents that will bind not just you, but anyone who comes after you, that this ridge is protected. That no one will build here, mine here, or disturb these graves. Ever. Genevieve looked at the weathered burial markers standing against the endless sky. She thought about property and ownership, about the way white law had carved up land that had belonged to other people for countless generations, about the way papers and deeds could not change what was true in deeper, older ways. Yes, she said without hesitation. Of course, yes, but I want you to help me mark it. This is not my gift to give. It never really belonged to me in any true sense. It is your land. It has always been your land, long before any surveyor drew lines on a map. I am just making sure the papers say what has always been true. Together, they walked the boundary she had planned, and at the point where her fenced property would end and the sacred ground would begin, Kangji sank the stake deep into the earth. Genevieve placed her hands over his on the mallet's handle. Their eyes met and held for a moment. Then together, with combined strength and shared purpose, they drove the stake home with one solid strike that sent the sound echoing across the prairie like a bell marking something significant and permanent. When it was done, they stood back and looked at what they had created, a physical marker of respect, of recognition, of a commitment to honor what had come before, and to build something better for what would come after. Winema stepped forward. She had been silent through all of this, her face carefully neutral as she watched. Now she looked at Genevieve directly, and when she spoke, her English was careful but clear. You honor our dead, she said, and you honor my brother who risked much for you. This, she gestured at the marker, the ridge, the protected land. This matters. It does not change everything. It does not bring back my son or undo all the harm that has been done to my people. But it matters. It was not quite forgiveness. Genevieve understood that Winema still carried grief for Waste and anger at the world that had killed him, and probably always would. But it was acknowledgement, recognition, the beginning of something that might, in time and with continued effort, become respect or even friendship. Thank you, Genevieve said quietly, for everything you have taught me, for allowing me to stay in your home, for making that beautiful cradle board for Leonie. I know it was not easy for you. Winema nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the horses, giving Genevieve and Kangji a moment of privacy. Kangji looked at Genevieve, and something in his expression made her breath catch something warm and hopeful and tentative all at once. I have been thinking, he said slowly, about what comes next. For me, for my people, for... He paused, searching for words. For us, you and me, Leonie, the future we might build together, if that is something you would want. Us, Genevieve's heart began to beat faster. I know it would not be easy. Kangji continued, giving her space to refuse, not assuming anything. Your people will talk. My people will talk. The law itself might not recognize such a thing as valid or legal. There will be those who say it is wrong, impossible, against God's plan or nature's order. But I have learned that those people said the same things about your land being protected, and we did it anyway, because it was right. What exactly are you asking? Genevieve needed to hear it, clearly needed to understand. I am asking, Kangji said, if you would let me help you build something that lasts. Something good. Not because you need protecting, you have proven beyond any doubt that you can protect yourself and your daughter, but because building together is better than building alone. Because partnership is stronger than individual effort. I am asking if you will be my partner in all the ways that matter. Genevieve looked at this man who had risked everything for a stranger's child, who had faced down guns and darkness and injustice without flinching, who was offering her not protection or rescue, but partnership, something far more valuable and rare. Yes, she said, her voice steady and certain. Yes, I want that. I want to build something together, something that honors both of our pasts and creates a future we can both live in. Kangji smiled a real smile, warm and transforming, lighting up his entire face. Good. That is very good. He did not kiss her. They were not yet at that place. And besides, Winema was waiting nearby with the horses, and propriety still mattered, even in this changed world. But he took her hand and held it firmly, and the touch said everything that words could not quite capture. They stood together on the ridge, looking out over land that would never quite belong to either of them, in the way white law understood ownership, but which they would protect together and build upon together. Below them, Genevieve's cabin stood solid and complete, smoke rising from its chimney. Beyond it, the prairie rolled away to distant horizons that held futures neither of them could predict or control. But they would face those futures together, partners, in the work of building something better than what had come before. On a warm evening 3 months later, Genevieve stood in the garden behind her completed cabin, watching Leonie take her first truly independent steps across the grass. The baby toddled forward with arms outstretched for balance, laughing with pure delight at her own daring, at the miracle of moving through the world on her own power. Kangji sat nearby on a rough-hewn bench he had built, carving a toy horse from soft cottonwood, his long fingers moving with the same precise care he brought to everything he did. He looked up as Leonie fell on her bottom in the grass and immediately started to get up again, undeterred. She is stubborn, he observed with obvious affection. Like her mother. She is strong, Genevieve corrected, smiling. Also like her mother. Kangji laughed, that warm sound that still surprised her sometimes, with how freely it came now, how much joy he seemed to find in small domestic moments. Yes, that too. They had not married, not in any legal sense the territory would recognize. The laws against such unions were clear and brutal, designed to prevent exactly what they were attempting. But they had made promises to each other in front of Kangji's people, and a small gathering of allies from Rock Creek, and those promises mattered more than any paper from a courthouse could ever matter. Kangji lived on the property now, in a dwelling they had built together that was part cabin and part teepee, something that honored both their traditions and created something new. He traded regularly with towns throughout the territory, building the network he had spoken of, while also helping Genevieve run the farm that was slowly, stubbornly beginning to produce real crops from soil that had fought them every step of the way. It was not easy. People in town still stared sometimes, and some still refused to do business with Genevieve because of her choice, but others, more than she had initially expected, treated them with quiet respect. Arthur Rowland always tipped his hat when they passed and spoke to them both with genuine warmth. Clarissa stopped by regularly with books and news and slowly becoming a true friend. Dr. Archer considered them both friends and allies. And on the ridge behind the cabin, the protected burial ground stood unmarked by fences, but clearly marked by the boundary stake they had driven together, a place where Kangji's people could always come to honor their ancestors, without fear of interference or disrespect. As twilight fell and the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue above, Genevieve scooped up Leonie and carried her inside for the evening routine, washing dusty hands and face-feeding songs in French and Lakota until the child's eyes grew heavy and sleep finally claimed her. Kangji followed them in adding wood to the stove for the night, banking the fire so it would burn slow and steady until morning. They moved around each other with the easy rhythm of people who had learned to share space, to anticipate needs, to work as partners in all the small tasks that made up a life. Later, when Leonie slept peacefully in her cradleboard and they sat together by the fire with cups of coffee, Genevieve spoke the question that had been on her mind for days. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? You could have walked away that first day, stayed safe, let white people solve white people's problems, and kept your people out of danger. Kangji considered this seriously, as he always did when she asked important questions. He did not believe in quick answers to deep questions. No, he said finally with certainty. I do not regret. Because walking away would have meant becoming a different kind of man, the kind who can witness injustice and do nothing, and staying fighting, helping you. He looked at her. That brought me here, to this life, to you, to building something that might last beyond us and matter to people we will never meet. I hope it lasts, Genevieve said quietly. I hope we are building something strong enough to survive whatever comes next. We are, Kangji said with absolute conviction, because we built it on truth, not on lies or fear or taking what belonged to others. We built it on truth and work and choosing to stand together when standing alone would have been easier and safer. That kind of foundation does not crumble easily. He was right, Genevieve thought. They had built something true. Not perfect, nothing in this hard territory was perfect, and they both understood that challenges would continue to come. But honest and solid and absolutely worth protecting. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass with a sound like ancient songs. Inside, the fire crackled peacefully, casting warm light on walls they had built with their own hands. And in her cradleboard near the stove, Leonie slept deeply secure in the knowledge, wordless but absolute, that she was safe, that she was loved, that the people who cared for her would move heaven and earth to protect her. It was not the life Genevieve had imagined when she left Paris with Pierre so many years ago. It was not the comfortable, civilized future she had dreamed of during that long boat journey across the Atlantic, full of hope and innocence and complete ignorance of what the West truly demanded. But it was hers, built by her own hands, defended by her own courage, shared with a partner who saw her as an equal and valued her strength rather than being threatened by it. And that, she thought, as Kangji's hand found hers in the firelight and held it with gentle strength, was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered.